Hey guys, this is another tutorial today. I've got two tutorials for you guys. One's a chunky journal, one's a notebook. This video is for the notebook version, but if you'd like to see the chunky journal version, I'll leave that link down below as well. So for this journal cover, you're going to want to use some cardboard, and I think a cereal box is perfect for this. It's kind of the right kind of weight. It's not too heavy or too thick, and it's a little bit flexible. So I think a cereal box works really well. That's what I'm using. I've just trimmed it down and folded it in half. And now I'm going to trim it down a little bit more to get it to the size journal that I like. You can make this whatever size that you want. I'm going to make mine about 5 by 7 inches. I used my paper trimmer and scissors to trim this down. You can just use scissors or whatever you have to cut it down to the size that you like. And then I'm going to start painting. So for this journal, I'm using some brown paint. I'm just mixing that up with some black, red, and yellow. But you can paint your cover whatever color you like. I'm just using brown to give me that really nice vintage effect. So I'm just going to paint that all over the cover. Then I just let that dry completely, as you can see. And now we're going to want to cut out a little circle shape in the front cover. So this cover is going to have like a little peepee hole that peeks through onto some kind of pattern on the first page. So to do that, if you have a die cut machine, you can use one of those to get a perfect circle. I do have one, but I'm going to do this manually and just pretend that I don't for the sake of this video. So you can take like a cup or something that's circular, trace the circle, and then cut it out with your scissors. I traced mine on the inside of the cover so that I didn't draw over the top of my paint. Then I just poke a hole through the middle of the circle and then carefully with my scissors cut out that circle as neatly as I can. And there you have your little circle cut out on the front cover. Now this next step is optional. Again, if you have an embossing machine, this is a really cool effect you can do, just to run it through an embossing folder, and that's going to give you a really beautiful pattern in your cover. You can skip this step, of course, it's not necessary, but it just adds a nice touch and a nice texture to the cover. Now I'm going to take some distress inks and sprays just to add a bit more depth of color to my cover. So I'm rubbing some ink down in the seams and then over the top of that design that I've just pressed into the cover. So if you do use an embossing folder to get a design in your cover, running some ink over the top like this helps bring out that pattern because it applies it to the raised areas of the pattern, and all the parts of the pattern that are imprinted kind of skip the ink. So it just helps to bring out that pattern a little bit more. I also added a little bit of sprays over the top just to give it a more imperfect look. I also used a spray sealant just to protect all of those inks and paints. And now we're going to flip it over and we're going to cover up the inside of the cover. So I'm taking a piece of scrapbook paper and just gluing it straight down onto the inside of the cover. And I like to actually trim it down after I've glued it just to make sure there's no room for error. So sometimes you might trim it down and think that it's going to be perfect, but you'll have a couple of millimeters that are out and it may not meet all the edges of the cover perfectly. So I think it's easier just to glue it down and then trim off whatever is left. And now we're just going to have to re-cut out our little circle shape that we cut before. And we're just going to do the same thing that we did before with our scissors. Just cut a little hole in the middle and then carefully re-cut out that circle. So it's a little bit easier this time because we can use the circle that we've already done as a guide for where to cut. And there we have our little cover ready to go. So now I'm just taking some plain white copy paper for the pages inside this journal, but I'm going to tea dye them. So I'm using tea and coffee, you can use whatever you have. I'm just pouring in some boiling water and then I'm just going to dunk my pages into the mix and let them sit in the mix for a couple of hours. Then I'm going to tip out all the excess mixture and I dried my papers in the oven, but you can let them air dry or dry in the sun. Once they're dry, I'm taking about 10 pages for my notebook. I'm going to then fold them in half perfectly. So they've already got a bit of a crease in the middle from where I tea dyed them, but I want to make sure these are nice and neat. Next, we just need to trim these pages down so that they're going to fit inside the notebook. And I like to just take my ruler and just sit the page beside my cover, and then just use that as a guide for how much I need to tear off. And it's good to do this while the pages are folded in half, because it just makes it really, really easy when you're sizing them up to fit inside your cover. Once you've trimmed all your pages down, we're going to stack them on top of each other. So all the creases are going to meet. They're going to sit right on top of each other open like that. Sometimes when you stack your pages, you'll find that the center pages, like maybe 2 or 3 of them, will hang out of the book a little bit more, even though they're the same size as the rest. That's just because they're last on the stack. So you can just trim them down a little bit more to make sure they're not going to overhang. Now for this notebook, since we have that circle cut out in the cover, we want to put something decorative on that first page so that you can peek through and see it. And I'm going to use this piece of fabric on my first page, but you can use anything you like. It can be a photo, it can be paper, it can be an illustration, it can be anything at all that you like on that first page. Just make sure that it sits in the right position so that it will sit inside that circle. Once you've attached your focal image on the first page, we're now going to bind the book. And this is really, really easy, I promise. And I'm so sorry guys, but my camera went out of focus a little bit for this part, so I'm sorry if it's a little bit trickier to see. First, you just want to stack your pages inside the cover where you want them to sit, and then you just want to get your paper clips and paper clip it all together so it won't move. Just want to take a awl and you want to poke 3 holes, so 1 in the middle, 1 up near the top and 1 down the bottom, and I didn't measure it out, I just eyeballed it. And then with your needle and thread, you're going to go through the center hole from the inside of the book. And then you're going to go back through either the top or bottom hole, it doesn't matter which one. And then once you're back in, you're going to go back out through the opposite hole on the other end. So for me, the bottom hole, and then I'm going to go back through the center hole. And then once you've come back through the center hole, you can remove your needle and you're just going to tie it off in a double knot nice and tight, and then you can trim off the excess thread. I've added a little diagram there in the top right corner, and if you follow the arrows on that diagram, it'll show you the path for your thread. And that is it, you guys. That gives you your little bound notebook. I think it turned out so cute. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and remember, if you want to learn how to create a more chunky, thicker book, I have a tutorial for that as well, and I'll leave a link to that in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.